Life in the Soviet Union was a slow, methodical rhythm, shaped by strict schedules, collective obligations, and an overarching ideology that emphasized the needs of the state over personal preference. For ordinary citizens, mornings often began before dawn, the faint light filtering through small, frosted windows in apartment blocks that dominated cities such as Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev. In urban areas, families typically lived in communal apartments, known as communalkas, where multiple families shared a single flat. Each family had one room for privacy, while kitchens, bathrooms, and hallways were shared spaces, turning daily routines into collective experiences. The small rooms were crowded, yet functional, filled with modest furniture, a stove for cooking, and personal belongings carefully arranged to make the best use of limited space. Despite the lack of personal space, neighbors often formed close bonds, helping each other with childcare, food, and daily chores. Meals were a central part of domestic life, with bread, potatoes, cabbage, and other locally grown vegetables forming the backbone of the diet. Citizens learned to navigate shortages with resourcefulness, supplementing rations with home gardens, bartered goods, or informal markets. Every action, from making breakfast to preparing children for school, was influenced by scarcity, efficiency, and routine in rural regions. Life revolved around collective farms, where villagers worked the land together under the direction of state-appointed managers. Daily labor was physically demanding, often beginning at first light, with citizens tending crops, maintaining farm equipment, and fulfilling quotas designed by central authorities. These tasks were framed as patriotic duty, the individual's effort contributing to the success of the socialist state. Even leisure was scarce. Free time was usually spent on household chores, community responsibilities, or informal socializing with neighbors. Despite these challenges, communities were tightly knit, providing mutual support in the face of limited resources and rigid expectations. Housing, while standardized, was assigned according to occupation, family size, and political reliability. Mobility was limited. Moving to a better apartment required years of waiting or strong connections within the bureaucracy. Within these assigned homes, families found ways to personalize their surroundings with photographs, handcrafted decorations, and small pieces of art, bringing warmth to otherwise uniform living spaces. Children played in shared courtyards or small indoor areas, their laughter and games creating fleeting moments of joy amidst the strictures of daily life. Mothers prepared meals with creativity and careful planning, often stretching meager ingredients into nourishing dishes that sustained the family through long workdays and school hours. Fathers worked in factories, offices, or farms, returning home tired yet expected to participate in family life, emphasizing the Soviet ideal of duty balanced with domestic responsibility. Food preparation and consumption were daily exercises in patience and resourcefulness. Queues at state-run stores were common, sometimes stretching for hours, as citizens waited for limited supplies of bread, meat, and other essentials. Each family developed strategies to make the most of available goods, creating soups, stews, and baked dishes that could stretch ingredients across multiple meals. Celebratory meals, though rare, were moments of cultural expression, whether for birthdays, weddings, or state holidays. reflecting traditions passed down through generations and adapted to the constraints of Soviet life. Education and child rearing were also closely intertwined with daily routines. Children attended schools that combined academic subjects with ideological instruction, preparing them for participation in the collective socialist project. Parents instilled discipline, respect for authority, and the importance of contributing to society, values reinforced by everyday routines. Women played a dual role, balancing professional duties with household management, often enduring long days that began before sunrise and ended late in the evening. Kitchens became spaces of creativity and strategy, where mothers managed limited ingredients to feed the family while preserving nutritional value and variety. Despite challenges, ordinary life in the Soviet Union had structure, predictability, and moments of quiet resilience. People adapted to the limitations imposed by bureaucracy, shortages, and communal living, finding joy in small rituals such as shared meals, morning greetings, and evening walks. The fabric of daily life, though monotonous to outsiders, fostered a sense of community, cooperation, and endurance. Citizens learned to navigate a world where personal desires were secondary to collective responsibility, finding dignity and meaning in the ordinary routines of family, work, and neighborhood life. In essence, life in the Soviet Union for ordinary citizens was a tapestry woven from discipline, scarcity, ingenuity, and social interdependence. Housing conditions, food management, family dynamics, and communal interactions created a rhythm that defined existence, shaping identities and daily experiences across generations. The collective ethos influenced everything, from how breakfast was prepared to how children were raised, creating a society where individuals found stability not in personal luxury but in shared effort, resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of fulfilling their roles within the broader social fabric. In the Soviet Union, work was not merely a means of earning a living, it was a central pillar of identity, a demonstration of one's loyalty to the state, and a crucial part of the socialist ideology that defined. Citizens were expected to contribute to the collective effort, whether in factories, offices, farms, or scientific institutions. And this expectation created a life structured around schedules, quotas, and labor obligations. Factories, in particular, were the heart of Soviet urban life, echoing with the constant hum of machinery, the clatter of assembly lines, and the rhythmic demands of production. From dawn until dusk, workers adhered to regimented routines designed to meet ambitious production targets that were often set without full regard for human limits. Each worker had a specific role, meticulously defined, and personal initiative was frequently secondary to collective output. Supervisors and party representatives monitored performance, ensuring that standards were maintained and that any deviation from expectations was quickly addressed. Women played an especially significant role in this system, balancing professional labor with household responsibilities, a dual burden that shaped much of Soviet daily life. Female workers were found in every sector, from textile factories producing uniforms to research laboratories developing new technologies. Their contribution was celebrated rhetorically by the state as a symbol of equality. Yet the reality was that women often faced longer workdays and higher pressures at home, managing both production quotas and family care. Women's labor was essential not only for economic productivity, but also for sustaining the social fabric of Soviet society. Mothers would leave their apartments before sunrise to reach factories or offices, often returning late in the evening. Yet they were expected to prepare meals, care for children, and maintain the home. The concept of the working mother became deeply ingrained, celebrated in state propaganda and everyday conversation alike, even as it placed enormous demands on women's energy and time. Industrial work itself was physically and mentally challenging. Factory floors were noisy, hot, and filled with the constant movement of machinery. Workers operated in shifts to keep production lines running around the clock, particularly in key industries such as steel, mining, chemicals, and heavy machinery. Despite the grueling environment, camaraderie often developed among colleagues, as shared struggles fostered mutual support and informal networks. Lunch breaks were brief and often taken in noisy canteens, where simple meals provided a brief respite from the relentless pace of labor. Supervisors not only evaluated productivity, but also emphasized ideological education, ensuring that workers understood their role within the socialist vision and internalized the values of collective achievement in offices and administrative institutions. The experience was different, but no less structured. White-collar employees adhered to strict routines, with schedules dictated by bureaucratic processes and party oversight. Even intellectual work was embedded within the framework of state priorities, with research projects, teaching, and policy implementation shaped by central directives. The emphasis on collective over individual accomplishment extended to these environments as well, with promotions, recognition, and rewards often tied to political reliability as much as professional competence beyond the physical and administrative demands of work. There was a strong social component to labor in the Soviet Union. Factories, farms, and offices became hubs of community life, where friendships, romantic relationships, and social networks developed. The workplace was a setting for collective celebrations, award ceremonies, and cultural events, reinforcing the notion that work was inseparable from social identity. Women often organized these gatherings, coordinated communal meals, and maintained morale during difficult periods, further highlighting their dual role as laborers and caretakers of social cohesion. Education and vocational training were closely tied to work life, ensuring that citizens were prepared for assigned roles. Technical schools, apprenticeships, and higher education institutions provided the knowledge and skills necessary to meet production targets and fulfill state objectives. Graduates were often assigned to specific jobs, and mobility between positions was regulated, making career planning a mix of personal ambition and bureaucratic allocation. Workdays were punctuated by standard routines, morning meetings, shift rotations, strict adherence to safety and productivity standards. Workers developed informal systems for efficiency, mentorship, and problem-solving. Despite the monotony and pressure, there were moments of human creativity and resilience. Workers took pride in mastering their tasks, finding satisfaction in meeting quotas or improving processes. The industrial and administrative worlds of the Soviet Union were spaces where ordinary people demonstrated remarkable endurance, balancing expectations from above with the realities of everyday life. Women's contributions were particularly striking. as they navigated the overlapping demands of production, family, and social obligations, shaping not only the economy, but also the culture of care and solidarity that underpinned Soviet society. Ultimately, the work life of Soviet citizens was an intricate dance of discipline, ideology, and survival. Factories and offices were more than workplaces. They were arenas where the principles of socialism were enacted daily, where individual effort merged with collective goals, and where citizens, particularly women, embodied the values of endurance, cooperation, and practical ingenuity. The rhythm of labor defined the day from morning to night, and within this rhythm, ordinary citizens crafted lives of resilience, creativity, and quiet determination, leaving a legacy of human endurance that would define the Soviet experience for generations. Education in the Soviet Union was not only a means of acquiring knowledge, but also a carefully structured instrument for shaping loyal, disciplined citizens aligned with the principles of socialism. From the earliest years, children were immersed in an environment designed to foster collective responsibility, ideological conformity, and practical skills necessary to serve the state. Primary education began with strict routines, formal lessons, and an emphasis on reading, writing, mathematics, and Soviet history. Each subject infused with narratives that highlighted the virtues of communal effort, heroism, and the triumph of the working class. Textbooks were carefully monitored by the government to ensure that ideological messaging was consistent, emphasizing the achievements of the Communist Party, the successes of Soviet industrialization, and the struggles overcome by the nation. Teachers were both educators and enforcers of these principles, guiding students not only through academic content, but also through behavioral expectations, discipline, and moral instruction. Children's daily routines were highly structured, beginning with early wake-up times, preparing for school, and often walking significant distances in urban or rural environments to reach their classrooms. School uniforms, simple yet standardized, created a sense of equality among students, reinforcing the socialist ideal that personal distinctions were secondary to collective identity. Meals at school were coordinated to ensure nutrition and reinforce communal habits, with students often eating together in noisy, bustling cafeterias. Beyond academics, children were taught practical skills such as sewing, basic engineering, agriculture, and household management, reflecting the state's emphasis on preparing them for both professional responsibilities and family life. Most notably, the pioneers and the Komsomol played a central role in shaping children's experiences and instilling political consciousness. Membership in these organizations was widespread and highly encouraged, with pioneers welcoming children as young as 9 and Komsomol for older adolescents. These organizations provided structured activities outside school hours, including community service projects, physical education, political education, and cultural events. Children participated in parades, group camping trips, and organized competitions, all designed to cultivate discipline, teamwork, and loyalty to the state. The red neckerchiefs of the pioneers, the badges, and ceremonial oaths became symbols of belonging, pride, and commitment to socialist ideals. Through these activities, children learned to navigate hierarchical structures, collaborate with peers, and internalize values that aligned personal achievement with collective benefit. Recess. Playtime and informal gatherings offered children limited but vital spaces for creativity, exploration, and social interaction. Games in schoolyards, sports competitions, and neighborhood adventures allowed moments of freedom and personal expression. Even within the overarching structure of state-guided education, parents often reinforced these activities by supervising small groups of children, teaching traditional songs, stories, and crafts, and providing encouragement and moral guidance. The combination of formal instruction, extracurricular engagement, and family involvement created a multi-layered environment in which children developed intellectually, socially, and emotionally, all under the watchful guidance of state and society. Education extended into adolescence with a strong focus on vocational and technical training. High school students were often prepared for careers in engineering, science, agriculture, or administration, reflecting both personal aptitudes and the economic needs of the state. Internships and practical work experiences were integrated into the curriculum, exposing students to the realities of professional life while reinforcing the value of labor as both duty and contribution to national progress. Even in leisure time, youth organizations emphasized skill development, ideological engagement, and physical fitness, blending enjoyment with the cultivation of responsibility and loyalty. Despite the rigorous structure and ideological oversight, childhood in the Soviet Union was marked by moments of imagination, discovery, and social bonding. Children formed friendships that often lasted a lifetime, shared stories and secrets, and engaged in playful activities that allowed glimpses of individuality within the collective framework. Literature, storytelling, and arts were woven into the education system, with children learning folk tales, poems, and songs that reflected both national heritage and socialist ideals. These cultural experiences provided a balance to the structured routines of school, work in youth organizations, and communal responsibilities in rural areas. Children's lives were closely tied to agricultural work and seasonal rhythms. Participation in collective farming tasks, care for animals, and maintenance of household gardens provided hands-on education, physical activity, and practical skills. Urban children, in contrast, were exposed to industrial environments, technical laboratories, and urban social programs, preparing them for careers that supported the machinery of modern Soviet society. Across both contexts, the underlying objective was the same: to cultivate disciplined, knowledgeable, and socially responsible citizens capable of sustaining the socialist state. Education, children's routines, and youth organizations were tightly interwoven in Soviet life, creating an environment where personal development, collective responsibility, and ideological education reinforced each other. Daily schedules, school structures, extracurricular activities, and family engagement together shaped the experiences of Soviet youth, instilling skills, values, and social behaviors that aligned with the state's expectations. Childhood in the Soviet Union, though heavily regulated and monitored, was rich with structured experiences, social learning, and opportunities for modest creativity and joy, preparing generations to navigate the demands of work, community, and citizenship with resilience, discipline, and a deep sense of belonging. The rise of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union marked a seismic transformation in political, social, and economic life, reshaping the nation from the remnants of Imperial Russia into a centralized socialist state. Following the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, the Communist Party, under the leadership of figures such as Vladimir Lenin, emerged as the dominant force, asserting control over every aspect of governance and public life. The early years of the Soviet Union were defined by ambitious efforts to consolidate power, establish ideological orthodoxy, and transform society according to Marxist-Leninist principles. The revolution promised equality, social justice, and the abolition of the class system, ideals that were propagated through speeches, literature, and education, capturing the imagination of many citizens while also imposing strict controls on dissent. Lenin, revered as the architect of the new state, was both a charismatic leader and a disciplined strategist, emphasizing the need for a vanguard party that could guide the proletariat toward socialist governance. Early Soviet leadership faced enormous challenges, including civil war, foreign intervention, and widespread economic disruption. The Communist Party established a centralized government structure, controlling legislative, executive, and judicial functions to ensure the survival and expansion of socialist rule. The party emphasized ideological purity, loyalty, and strict adherence to directives, with mechanisms in place to monitor and enforce conformity across all levels of society. Citizens were educated from an early age in the principles of Marxism-Leninism, and participation in political life was encouraged for those who demonstrated ideological commitment. Propaganda played a critical role, presenting party leaders as infallible visionaries guiding the nation through a period of unprecedented change. Public portraits, statues, and state media highlighted Lenin's image, reinforcing the notion that the success of the Soviet experiment depended on unwavering adherence to party leadership. Following Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin emerged as the new central figure, consolidating power through a combination of political maneuvering, ideological enforcement, and ruthless elimination of rivals. The 1920s and 1930s under Stalin were characterized by rapid industrialization, forced collectivization, and the centralization of authority in the Communist Party. The government implemented ambitious economic plans aimed at transforming the Soviet Union into a global industrial power, with factories, infrastructure, projects, and urban development prioritized over individual welfare. Political purges targeted perceived enemies, resulting in imprisonment, exile, or execution for those who challenged or failed to fully align with the party line. Fear became a pervasive element of life, reinforcing obedience and loyalty while discouraging dissent. Stalin's leadership style, combining ideological rigor with authoritarian control, profoundly influenced the daily experiences of citizens, shaping education, work, culture, and social interactions. The Communist Party's rise was not only about leadership, but also about institutional mechanisms that ensured its dominance. Party committees were embedded in workplaces, schools, and communities, monitoring behavior, evaluating loyalty, and organizing political education. Citizens were expected to participate in meetings, rallies, and collective decision-making processes, which reinforced ideological conformity and created an omnipresent sense of party oversight. The integration of party structures into daily life blurred the boundaries between personal, professional, and political spheres, making participation in the Communist Party an inescapable aspect of citizenship for many. Local party leaders often served as intermediaries between the government and the populace, coordinating the implementation of directives while also reporting back on public sentiment, reinforcing the feedback loop that maintained centralized control despite the authoritarian nature of leadership. The early Soviet period also fostered a sense of collective purpose and historical destiny. Citizens were encouraged to believe that their labor, sacrifices, and adherence to socialist principles contributed to the creation of a more just, equitable society. Celebrations of revolutionary anniversaries, state ceremonies, and public holidays commemorated key moments in party history, embedding the narrative of struggle and triumph into the fabric of everyday life. Education, media, and culture reinforced these messages, depicting early leaders as heroic figures whose guidance was essential to the nation's survival and progress. The rise of the Communist Party also involved significant social engineering, including campaigns to promote literacy, industrial skills, and ideological awareness. Citizens were encouraged to embrace collective values, participate in social programs, and support state initiatives such as agricultural collectivization and industrial expansion. The early leaders' vision was ambitious: to eliminate inequality, modernize the economy, and create a society free from class oppression. While the methods employed were often harsh and repressive, the ideological framework shaped the development of the Soviet Union for decades, influencing governance, social interactions, and individual aspirations. In summary, the rise of the Communist Party and the leadership of early Soviet figures like Lenin and Stalin defined the political landscape of the Soviet Union. Their vision, strategies, and methods shaped the governance structures, social norms, and daily experiences of citizens, creating a society in which loyalty, discipline, and ideological alignment were paramount. Citizens navigated a world where the state permeated every aspect of life, from education to work, culture to family, and personal behavior to public participation. The legacy of these early leaders was a highly centralized, ideologically driven state that demanded obedience, fostered collective purpose, and left a lasting imprint on the nation's history, identity, and consciousness. In the Soviet Union, the control of information was not merely a political tool. It was a foundational element of the state's power and a critical means of shaping the perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors of millions of citizens. Propaganda permeated every aspect of life, from newspapers and radio broadcasts to posters, films, and public ceremonies, creating a carefully curated version of reality that emphasized the triumphs of socialism, the moral superiority of the working class, and the omnipresence of the Communist Party. Citizens encountered these messages daily, whether in educational settings, workplaces, or public spaces, reinforcing the ideology that personal success and happiness were inseparable from loyalty to the state. The language of propaganda was both celebratory and cautionary, highlighting collective achievements while warning against the dangers of dissent, corruption, and individualism that contradicted the principles of the socialist. Project Censorship was the mechanism that made propaganda effective, ensuring that every book, article, film, and piece of art aligned with the party line. Writers, journalists, and artists were expected to produce works that glorified the state, celebrated labor, and reinforced ideological conformity. Anything that deviated from approved themes, critiqued leadership, or explored alternative political ideas risked suppression, banning, or severe punishment. Libraries, theaters, and publishing houses operated under strict supervision, with government committees reviewing content before it reached the public. Even personal correspondence could be monitored, creating an environment in which citizens were constantly aware that their words and actions were subject to scrutiny. The aim was not only to control information, but to mold reality itself, ensuring that the narrative of Soviet success, progress, and collective unity dominated every facet of public consciousness. Media outlets were strategically designed to reinforce state messaging and educate the population in accordance with ideological objectives. Newspapers and magazines published daily updates on production achievements, political events, and cultural milestones, often accompanied by stories that highlighted exemplary citizens who embodied socialist virtues. Radio broadcasts carried similar content, reaching homes and workplaces across vast distances, ensuring that even those in remote areas were exposed to consistent messaging. Films, theater productions, and later television programs were carefully produced to entertain while simultaneously instilling ideological principles, blending narrative storytelling with moral and political instruction. Children's programming and educational materials were particularly focused on instilling loyalty from an early age, teaching young citizens the importance of obedience, teamwork, and ideological conformity. The effectiveness of propaganda was amplified by its integration into the physical environment. Posters adorned city streets, factories, schools, and public buildings, often depicting heroic workers, soldiers, and leaders engaged in productive labor or revolutionary action. Slogans celebrated collective achievement, warned against the dangers of sabotage or dissent, and reinforced the moral superiority of socialist ideals. Statues and monuments commemorated revolutionary events, victories in war, and the accomplishments of the state, creating a visual landscape in which ideology was omnipresent. Citizens were not passive recipients of these messages. They were expected to internalize them, participate in commemorations, and demonstrate allegiance through behavior, speech, and civic engagement. Censorship extended beyond public media into private, cultural, and intellectual life. Academic research, artistic expression, and historical scholarship were subject to ideological evaluation, with deviation from the party line resulting in professional marginalization, imprisonment, or exile. Even religious expression was tightly controlled, with many institutions suppressed or co-opted to align with state objectives. This environment created a climate in which citizens were constantly aware of the boundaries of acceptable thought and behavior, internalizing rules that governed both public and private life. Fear of repercussions ensured compliance, while the omnipresence of propaganda reinforced the desired narrative, creating a society in which the state's version of reality became the dominant framework for understanding the world. Propaganda and censorship also shaped perceptions of international relations, national identity, and social morality. Citizens were presented with a worldview in which the Soviet Union was a moral and political leader, guiding humanity toward equality, justice, and progress. While capitalist nations were portrayed as corrupt, exploitative, and morally deficient, education and media reinforced this dichotomy, creating a shared sense of purpose, collective pride, and ideological vigilance. Citizens were encouraged to participate in state programs, support industrial and agricultural initiatives, and report suspicious behavior, all framed as contributions to the greater good. Despite the restrictive and controlled environment, citizens developed ways to interpret, question, or even subvert the messaging around them. Humor, folklore, informal networks, and subtle acts of resistance allowed for private negotiation of reality, creating spaces in which individuals could maintain personal perspectives and cultural traditions alongside state-imposed narratives. These subtle forms of adaptation demonstrated resilience and creativity, revealing how ordinary people navigated the complex interplay of propaganda, censorship, and daily life. In essence, the Soviet Union's control of information through propaganda and censorship was comprehensive, shaping public perception, behavior, and belief systems at every level. It reinforced loyalty, discipline, and ideological conformity, while simultaneously limiting dissent and alternative viewpoints. Citizens' daily lives, from education to work, leisure to family interactions, were infused with messaging designed to cultivate collective identity, reinforce party authority, and ensure alignment with state objectives. The omnipresence of propaganda and strict control of information created a society in which reality was as much constructed by the state as experienced by individuals, leaving a lasting imprint on the consciousness, behavior, and culture of Soviet citizens. Life in the Soviet Union was characterized by a pervasive sense of surveillance and control, where public behavior, private conversations, and even personal thoughts were subtly guided or strictly constrained by the presence of the state. The secret police, first the Cheka and later the NKVD and KGB, functioned as the eyes and ears of the Communist Party, monitoring citizens for signs of dissent, disloyalty, or deviation from the prescribed social and political norms. Their influence extended into everyday life, creating an environment in which trust, caution, and self-censorship became integral to survival. Individuals were acutely aware that their words, actions, and associations could be reported, scrutinized, or punished, instilling a quiet but constant fear that permeated homes, workplaces, schools, and social gatherings. Neighborhoods and workplaces were often integrated into this surveillance network, with informants, sometimes neighbors, or even family members observing behavior and reporting suspicious activity to the authorities. The mere act of criticizing government policy, expressing doubt, or failing to participate enthusiastically in political events could draw attention and potential consequences. Citizens quickly learned to navigate this intricate web of observation, carefully moderating their speech, gestures, and relationships to avoid suspicion. Conversations were often guarded, and private moments carried an underlying tension. As the boundaries between personal and political life were blurred by the ever-present possibility of scrutiny, public life itself was structured around demonstrations of loyalty, conformity, and participation. Citizens attended mandatory rallies, celebrations, and parades, where displays of enthusiasm for the state and its leaders were expected and closely observed. Participation was not optional, and failure to engage or insufficient enthusiasm could be interpreted as disloyalty. Schools, workplaces, and communal organizations reinforced these expectations, integrating ideological instruction and collective activities into daily routines. Citizens were encouraged to report anti-Soviet behavior or thoughts, fostering a climate in which fear of reprisal, reinforced compliance, and self-policing became a survival strategy. The secret police played a central role in maintaining this climate of control. They investigated, arrested, and often executed or imprisoned individuals perceived as threats, whether for political opposition, dissent, or mere suspicion. The reach of these organizations extended into every facet of society, from factories and farms to educational institutions and cultural organizations. Citizens understood that their reputations, livelihoods, and even physical safety were contingent upon adherence to state-imposed norms. This knowledge shaped interactions, relationships, and decisions in subtle and profound ways, influencing how people spoke, whom they trusted, and how they presented themselves in both public and private contexts. Fear in the Soviet Union was not only punitive, but psychological, woven into the very fabric of society. The threat of surveillance, the unpredictability of enforcement, and the often arbitrary nature of punishment created an atmosphere in which anxiety, caution, and hyper-awareness were constant companions. Families discussed safety, children were taught to obey rules meticulously, and neighbors often maintained polite distance, careful not to overstep boundaries that could attract scrutiny. At the same time, citizens learned to adapt, develop networks of trust, and cultivate resilience, finding ways to maintain personal dignity, social bonds, and cultural traditions despite the pressures imposed by an omnipresent state apparatus. Cultural and social life was heavily influenced by this scrutiny. Theaters, libraries, and community centers operated under strict guidelines, with performances, books, and events subject to censorship and ideological oversight. Religious practices, private gatherings, and informal discussions were monitored indirectly, creating a society in which public compliance and private adaptation were necessary for survival. Despite this, citizens found subtle ways to express individuality, share humor, and preserve traditions, demonstrating creativity and resilience in navigating a world dominated by surveillance and fear. The psychological impact of this environment was profound. Trust was conditional, friendships were carefully managed, and citizens developed a nuanced understanding of acceptable behavior. Families became protective units, teaching children caution and awareness, while adults learned to interpret signals, gauge risk, and operate within complex social codes. Loyalty, discipline, and careful attention to public appearances were not simply moral virtues, but practical necessities for survival in a system where deviation could have severe consequences. Ultimately, public life under government scrutiny in the Soviet Union was defined by the interplay of control, fear, and adaptation. The secret police maintained authority and enforced conformity, while citizens navigated a landscape of constant observation with vigilance, strategy, and quiet resilience. Fear was both a tool of governance and a lived reality, shaping social interactions, personal decisions, and cultural expression. Within this constrained environment, ordinary people developed networks of trust, subtle forms of resistance, and strategies for survival, demonstrating human adaptability and endurance in a society where every aspect of life was influenced by the presence and power of the state. Culture in the Soviet Union played a uniquely dual role. It was both a source of personal enrichment and a tool of ideological reinforcement. Arts, literature, theater, and music were central to daily life, offering citizens not only moments of aesthetic pleasure, but also carefully curated narratives that reflected socialist ideals. Literature, in particular, was highly promoted as a means of educating and guiding citizens, with classic Russian novels coexisting alongside works that highlighted industrial achievement, collective effort, and the heroism of ordinary workers and soldiers. Authors such as Maxim Gorky were celebrated for their portrayals of proletarian struggle and triumph, and their works were often incorporated into school curricula, public readings, and cultural programs. Citizens could access literature through libraries, which were widely distributed across urban and rural areas, although the content was strictly controlled by state censorship. Books, pamphlets, and magazines reinforced the party line, blending entertainment with ideological instruction and shaping citizens' perceptions of history, society, and personal responsibility. Theater was another vital component of cultural life, with performances ranging from classical Russian dramas to contemporary plays promoting socialist values. Cities and towns across the Soviet Union maintained theaters where citizens could attend regular productions, often organized in conjunction with educational or political initiatives. Attending the theater was a common communal activity, a way to experience artistry, socialize, and engage with narratives that celebrated collective achievement. Playwrights were encouraged to explore themes that aligned with state ideology, including labor, heroism, patriotism, and moral instruction, creating performances that were as much instructional as they were entertaining. Directors, actors, and production crews operated within a framework of censorship and state oversight. Yet creativity and technical skill flourished, producing works that were memorable, emotionally compelling, and reflective of the cultural climate. Music, both classical and folk, held a cherished place in Soviet daily life. State-supported orchestras, choirs, and musical ensembles performed regularly, providing citizens with access to high-quality performances. Folk music remained particularly important, linking communities to traditions, heritage, and shared cultural identity, while compositions celebrating industrial and military achievements reinforced the ideological goals of the state. Citizens engaged with music in multiple settings, attending public concerts, listening to radio broadcasts, participating in community choirs, or performing in small groups at home or in schools. Music was intertwined with education, youth organizations, and public ceremonies, enhancing social cohesion while fostering appreciation for artistic skill and collective participation. Visual arts were similarly omnipresent, blending aesthetic expression with ideological messaging. Paintings, sculptures, murals, and posters depicted heroic workers, revolutionary events, and celebrated leaders, reinforcing the narrative of progress and achievement. Citizens encountered these works in public spaces, government buildings, and educational institutions, integrating artistic appreciation with ideological reinforcement. Artists, much like writers and performers, operated within a system of oversight that ensured alignment with socialist realism, a style that emphasized clarity, optimism, and the glorification of labor and communal life. Despite these constraints, many artists found ways to express individuality, explore innovative techniques, and contribute meaningfully to cultural life. Cultural participation extended into daily routines and personal lives. Citizens attended exhibitions, read newspapers and magazines, sang folk songs at community gatherings, and engaged with art and literature in schools and workplaces. Even ordinary apartment spaces often featured framed portraits, family albums, and small reproductions of famous works, reflecting a desire to incorporate culture into domestic life. Children were introduced to music, literature, and theater from a young age, participating in performances, recitations, and art projects that combined learning with creative expression. These experiences fostered appreciation for the arts, reinforced social norms, and cultivated a sense of belonging to a shared cultural heritage. Despite the ideological overlay, culture also provided avenues for personal reflection, enjoyment, and modest escapism. Citizens found pleasure in attending performances, reading novels, listening to music, or discussing art with friends and family. Moments that allowed for engagement with ideas, emotions, and creativity beyond the immediate demands of work, politics, and social obligations. Cultural life, while heavily structured and monitored, contributed to the rhythm of everyday life, offering balance, enrichment, and subtle ways to explore identity, taste, and emotion within the broader framework of Soviet society in essence. Arts, literature, theater, and music were deeply embedded in the lives of Soviet citizens, serving both public and private functions. They educated, entertained, inspired, and reinforced ideological commitments, while also providing spaces for personal engagement, reflection, and enjoyment. Cultural life created connections across generations, urban and rural communities, and social classes, shaping perceptions, values, and daily experiences. Within the constraints of state oversight, Soviet citizens cultivated a rich tapestry of artistic and intellectual engagement, demonstrating the enduring human desire for creativity, beauty, and expression, even in a highly structured society. Sports and public celebrations were vital elements of daily life in the Soviet Union, serving as tools for social cohesion, ideological reinforcement, and the promotion of physical and moral discipline. From organized competitions to informal neighborhood games, athletics were embedded into both school curricula and adult life, reflecting the state's belief that physical fitness was inseparable from civic duty and ideological commitment. Children were introduced to gymnastics, track and field, team sports, and martial exercises from an early age, often through school programs and youth organizations such as the Young Pioneers. Sports events were meticulously organized, with training schedules, competitions, and demonstrations designed to instill discipline, teamwork, and a sense of collective achievement. Victories in local, regional, and national competitions were celebrated as communal successes, reinforcing the idea that individual effort contributed to the strength and prestige of the socialist state. Adult citizens were equally engaged in physical activities, whether through participation in workplace teams, communal sporting events, or state-sponsored tournaments. Factories, schools, and community centers often maintained sports facilities, from soccer fields and basketball courts to swimming pools and gyms, providing venues for both organized competition and informal recreation. Sports clubs and societies were integrated into daily routines, offering opportunities for citizens to build camaraderie, maintain fitness, and demonstrate loyalty to collective ideals. The government emphasized that physical education and sports were not merely recreational but were also forms of preparation for military service, labor, productivity, and social responsibility, blending practical utility with ideological significance. Public events extended beyond athletics, encompassing parades, demonstrations, exhibitions, and cultural festivals. Citizens were expected to participate actively, displaying enthusiasm and unity while reinforcing social and political norms. Revolutionary anniversaries, such as the October Revolution, were marked with grand parades featuring military displays, workers' contingents, youth organizations, and cultural performances. Streets were decorated with banners, flags, and slogans, creating a visually striking environment that celebrated socialist ideals and collective accomplishments. Participation in these events was both an expectation and a social signal, demonstrating loyalty, civic engagement, and alignment with state ideology. Holiday celebrations combined personal, communal, and ideological elements, providing moments of respite from daily routines while reinforcing collective identity. Traditional holidays, such as New Year, May Day, and Victory Day, were infused with public ceremonies, state rituals, and cultural performances, blending family gatherings with organized festivities. Citizens decorated homes and public spaces, exchanged gifts, and participated in communal activities, creating a shared sense of joy and belonging. Youth organizations often played central roles in these celebrations, organizing performances, parades, and volunteer activities that emphasized participation, discipline, and ideological messaging. Even in rural areas, holiday celebrations incorporated collective gatherings, communal meals, and performances, fostering solidarity and cultural continuity. Sports and public celebrations were closely linked to propaganda and education, serving as platforms for ideological reinforcement. Athletes, performers, and participants were often portrayed as exemplars of socialist values, demonstrating discipline, loyalty, and dedication. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and later television highlighted achievements, victories, and exemplary behavior, creating role models for citizens of all ages. Awards, medals, and recognition ceremonies celebrated not only athletic skill or performance, but also adherence to moral and ideological expectations, merging personal accomplishment with collective ideals. These activities also had profound social functions, offering citizens opportunities to build networks, develop friendships, and cultivate a sense of belonging. Community participation in sports, events, and celebrations strengthened interpersonal bonds, created shared memories, and provided structured outlets for leisure and recreation. Families, schools, and workplaces often coordinated participation, reinforcing connections across generational, social, and occupational lines. Even within the highly controlled environment of the Soviet state, these communal experiences provided spaces for joy, pride, and personal engagement. Despite the ideological framing, citizens approached sports and celebrations with genuine enthusiasm and creativity. Children eagerly prepared for athletic competitions. Adults took pride in their roles in organizing events, and families celebrated milestones within the framework of public and state-sanctioned rituals. The blending of personal enjoyment with collective participation exemplified the ways in which citizens navigated the structured environment of Soviet life, finding opportunities for expression, recreation, and social connection even within a highly regulated society. In summary, sports, public events, and holiday celebrations were integral to the rhythm of everyday life in the Soviet Union. They promoted physical fitness, social cohesion, ideological alignment, and communal identity, while also providing opportunities for personal engagement, joy, and cultural expression. Citizens' participation in these activities reinforced collective values, created shared experiences, and shaped daily routines, highlighting the interplay between individual initiative and state-directed social organization. Within these frameworks, Soviet society cultivated a sense of unity, pride, and belonging, demonstrating how structured, recreational, and celebratory activities contributed to both personal fulfillment and the broader objectives of the socialist state. In the Soviet Union, religion was officially discouraged and often suppressed, yet it remained a quiet and resilient presence in the lives of many citizens. The state promoted atheism as part of its ideological framework, aiming to replace religious practices with socialist values, collective loyalty, and rational scientific thought. Churches, mosques, and synagogues were closed, repurposed, or heavily monitored, and religious instruction in schools was banned. Despite these restrictions, cultural and familial traditions rooted in religious observance persisted, often practiced in private homes, family gatherings, or clandestine community networks. Citizens adapted their practices to avoid conflict with authorities, blending customary rituals with secular celebrations to maintain continuity and a sense of identity, even in cases where public expression of faith was impossible. Families quietly preserved religious stories, prayers, and moral teachings, transmitting them from one generation to the next in subtle and private ways. Family traditions played a central role in sustaining cultural continuity and personal identity. Celebrations such as weddings, birthdays, and seasonal festivals were infused with a mixture of state-approved and traditional elements, allowing families to honor their heritage while navigating ideological restrictions. Weddings, for example, often included both state ceremonies at local offices and private home gatherings where family and friends shared blessings, songs, and traditional foods. Birthdays were celebrated quietly with small gifts, handmade decorations, and shared meals, creating intimate moments of joy amidst the structured routines of everyday Soviet life. Seasonal festivals, such as harvest-related celebrations, were often adapted to emphasize collective labor and achievement, with families decorating homes, preparing special dishes, and engaging in communal activities that combine social, cultural, and ideological elements even in the absence of formal religious observance. Rituals such as cooking traditional meals, telling stories, singing folk songs, and observing key seasonal events preserved communal bonds and intergenerational knowledge. Homes became sanctuaries of cultural memory, where grandparents passed down customs, children learned family stories, and adults maintained practices that reinforced a sense of belonging and personal history. In rural areas, these practices often revolved around the cycles of agricultural life, with seasonal planting and harvesting accompanied by folk songs, rituals, and small feasts that celebrated nature's abundance and reinforced community solidarity. Urban families adapted these practices in smaller, apartment-based forms, maintaining rituals around cooking, storytelling, and shared meals, ensuring that cultural memory persisted despite the constraints of city living and state ideology. Cultural practices often adapted to the secular framework imposed by the state. Holidays such as Easter or Christmas were transformed into communal celebrations, with secular symbols, performances, and public activities replacing explicit religious observances. New Year celebrations, already widely popular, were emphasized as a primary festive occasion, allowing families to gather, exchange gifts, and engage in rituals that maintained joy, community, and emotional continuity. Seasonal and agricultural traditions, such as harvest festivals, were reframed as celebrations of labor and collective achievement, merging cultural heritage with socialist ideals. In many families, this adaptation included decorating homes with handmade ornaments, creating festive meals inspired by traditional dishes, and sharing stories that linked the past with present practices. Art, literature, and music were also intertwined with cultural practices and family life. Folk songs, storytelling, and traditional crafts were integrated into domestic routines, school activities, and community events, providing continuity of knowledge and reinforcing values such as respect, cooperation, and resilience. Children learned through observation and participation, absorbing both artistic skill and moral instruction, while adults used cultural practices to maintain connection with ancestry, geography, and communal identity. For instance, it was common for grandmothers to teach grandchildren embroidery, wood carving, or simple folk dances, blending creativity with cultural transmission. Similarly, parents often recited tales of historical or mythical significance during evenings at home, reinforcing moral lessons and a sense of shared heritage, despite the official discouragement of religion. Underground networks and private observances allowed spiritual life to persist. Citizens celebrated religious milestones quietly, lit candles in hidden corners, or visited places of worship discreetly. These practices provided a sense of continuity, moral guidance, and emotional comfort, serving as counterpoints to the rigid structures of public life and state-imposed ideology. Religion, when practiced privately, intertwined with family and community traditions, reinforcing resilience, identity, and intergenerational bonds. Even within cities, where surveillance was more intense, families devised subtle rituals, such as reading religious stories, celebrating saints' days privately, or singing hymns in the home, carefully balancing cultural preservation with safety. Education also played a role in shaping how citizens navigated cultural and religious traditions. Children were taught the official secular narrative. Yet parents and grandparents often supplemented this with lessons in family customs, historical memory, and folk knowledge. Stories of ancestral resilience, local heroes, and historical events were shared in homes, creating a layered understanding of identity that balanced ideological instruction with cultural heritage. Music, crafts, and literature further bridged generations, providing citizens with both aesthetic pleasure and moral grounding. For example, folk instruments like the balalaika or accordion were common in family gatherings, accompanying songs and dances that connected participants to regional traditions and collective memory. In rural areas, the persistence of cultural and familial practices was especially pronounced. Agricultural communities maintained seasonal rituals, harvest celebrations, and folk traditions, often blending local customs with permissible state rituals. Urban families adapted differently, emphasizing home-based observances, communal celebrations, and participation in state-approved events, while subtly preserving private rituals. Across both contexts, these practices fostered social cohesion, intergenerational continuity, and personal identity, providing citizens with a sense of stability, purpose, and connection in a highly regulated society. Children learned respect for tradition through participation in meals, music, and storytelling, while adults found solace and identity reinforcement in collective memory and routine practices. In essence, religion, cultural practices, and family traditions in the Soviet Union were acts of resilience, adaptation, and continuity. While official policy sought to replace spiritual and traditional life with secular, socialist frameworks, citizens found ways to preserve their heritage, maintain communal bonds, and celebrate the rhythms of life. Homes, schools, and communities became arenas where cultural knowledge, moral instruction, and family rituals endured, ensuring that even within a tightly controlled society, the values, practices, and emotional richness of personal and collective history persisted. These traditions provided both comfort and identity, helping citizens navigate the challenges of everyday life, cultivate meaningful relationships, and sustain cultural memory across generations. Ultimately, the persistence of these practices highlighted the human capacity to adapt creatively within restrictive systems. Families became custodians of culture, communities nurtured shared memory, and individuals maintained moral and emotional continuity despite ideological pressures. Through music, storytelling, celebrations, and private rituals, Soviet citizens carved out spaces for humanity, connection, and personal identity, demonstrating that even under a regime characterized by control and surveillance, the essential elements of culture, faith, and family endured, leaving a legacy of resilience and continuity for future generations. The Soviet Union's rapid industrialization in the 1930s and beyond transformed the country from a primarily agrarian society into a vast industrial power. This ambitious effort, spearheaded by the state under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, reshaped not only the economy but also the physical and social landscape of Soviet cities and towns. Urban development projects were closely tied to industrial objectives, as factories, steel mills, mining operations, and energy plants were constructed in previously undeveloped regions, often in harsh climates or remote areas. Citizens from across the nation were mobilized to work in these projects, participating in collective labor that was framed as both patriotic duty and ideological commitment. The transformation was immense, creating new urban centers, transportation networks, and housing solutions designed to accommodate the influx of workers required for the rapidly expanding industrial economy. The process of industrialization involved the implementation of 5-year plans, ambitious state-directed programs that set production targets for key industries, including steel, coal, machinery, and textiles. These plans were enforced with strict oversight and tight deadlines, motivating a labor force that often worked under challenging conditions. Citizens were expected to contribute not only through sheer labor, but also through creativity, problem-solving, and dedication to collective goals. Urban centers emerged around industrial hubs, with towns built near factories and mines to house the growing workforce. These developments transformed the geography of the Soviet Union, as previously rural or sparsely populated areas became bustling industrial zones, complete with infrastructure such as roads, railways, and communication networks. Worker housing was an essential aspect of urban development during this period. The state implemented standardized housing projects, known as communalki and later micro-districts, designed to provide accommodations for families of industrial workers, while promoting collective living and ideological conformity. Communalki, or communal apartments, involved multiple families sharing a single unit, with private rooms but common kitchens, bathrooms, and living areas. These arrangements were intended to foster collective behavior, mutual support, and adherence to socialist values, while also addressing the severe housing shortage caused by rapid urban migration. Life in these communal spaces required negotiation, cooperation, and discipline, as citizens adapted to close quarters, shared resources, and the constant presence of neighbors, all within an environment shaped by both scarcity and state expectations. Later, urban planning shifted toward microdistricts, larger residential blocks with integrated services such as schools, clinics, shops, and recreation areas, designed to create self-sufficient communities. These developments were part of a broader vision of modern socialist urban life, emphasizing functionality, accessibility, and collective identity. The architecture was characterized by simplicity, uniformity, and efficiency, with apartment buildings often constructed in rows using prefabricated materials to meet the pressing demand for housing. Streets were planned to accommodate both pedestrians and vehicles, and public spaces were included to encourage social interaction, recreation, and participation in state-organized events. The everyday life of workers and their families was deeply shaped by this urbanization. Factory schedules dictated daily routines with long work hours, shift changes, and mandatory participation in state programs, influencing how citizens structured their days. Housing conditions, whether in communal apartments or micro-districts, citizens navigated these new urban environments by building networks of mutual support, sharing resources, and participating in community activities, all while remaining under the watchful eye of local authorities, who monitored compliance with state norms and labor expectations. Industrialization also had profound social and cultural effects. Workers' achievements were celebrated in newspapers, posters, and public ceremonies, creating a sense of pride and collective purpose. Education and training programs were introduced to develop technical skills, promote literacy, and prepare citizens for specialized roles in industry. Youth organizations and labor brigades encouraged participation in building projects, agricultural initiatives, and factory work, fostering a culture of collective responsibility and ideological commitment. Cultural centers, libraries, and clubs were integrated into urban planning, providing spaces for artistic expression, education, and socialization, and reinforcing the connection between work, community, and socialist values. The experience of industrialization was not uniform across the Soviet Union. Urban centers in European Russia, Ukraine, and the Urals experienced rapid growth, while remote regions in Siberia and Central Asia saw industrial projects accompanied by harsh conditions, shortages, and logistical challenges. Citizens in these areas often endured extreme climates, long travel distances, and limited access to basic amenities. Yet state propaganda emphasized the importance of their contribution to the national project. Heroic narratives portrayed workers as builders of socialism, with exceptional laborers celebrated in newspapers, at factory meetings, and during public events. These narratives reinforced the ideological framing of industrialization as both a moral and civic duty. Urban development also transformed social interactions, family life, and community structures, with families moving into newly constructed apartments or communal spaces. Citizens developed new routines for childcare, household management, and socialization. Schools and daycare centers were integrated into residential districts, allowing parents to participate in labor while ensuring children received education and care. Public spaces such as parks, squares, and cultural centers encouraged community engagement, fostering shared identity, collective memory, and participation in social initiatives. These urban planning strategies reflected the state's goal of harmonizing work, family life, and ideological education within a structured environment. In summary, industrialization and urban development in the Soviet Union reshaped the physical, social, and cultural landscapes of the nation. Worker housing, whether communal apartments or multi-structures, transformed daily life, influencing family dynamics, social interaction, and community identity. Citizens navigated demanding work schedules, scarce resources, and close living conditions, while participating in state programs, cultural activities, and collective celebrations. Industrial projects, urban planning, and housing initiatives were deeply intertwined with ideological goals, aiming to foster collective responsibility, socialist values, and a shared sense of purpose. Within these environments, Soviet citizens demonstrated resilience, adaptability, and creativity, shaping personal and communal life in ways that balanced the demands of rapid modernization with the realities of everyday existence. The Soviet Union's rapid industrial growth demanded an extensive and efficient transportation network, both to move raw materials to factories and to facilitate the daily commute of millions of workers. Railways were the backbone of this system, connecting industrial hubs, mining regions, and urban centers across vast distances, from the European parts of Russia to remote Siberian territories. Trains transported not only coal, steel, and machinery, but also workers relocating to industrial towns and new urban districts. Citizens often relied on these networks for daily commutes, as factory schedules were tightly structured and required punctual attendance. Trains and trams became familiar sights in urban life, often crowded and noisy, reflecting both the scale of industrial mobilization and the intensity of daily routines under the Soviet system. Public transportation was complemented by trams, buses, and later metro systems in major cities such as Moscow and Leningrad. These networks allowed workers to reach factories, schools, and administrative centers efficiently, while also reflecting the state's effort to organize urban life around accessibility and collective function. Citizens navigated these systems with predictable regularity, integrating travel into their daily routines and learning to anticipate delays, crowded carriages, and communal behavior rules. Public transportation was also a space of social interaction, where citizens exchanged news, observed the routines of others, and participated, however subtly, in the shared rhythms of collective life. Factories were the heart of industrialization and the center of daily work, life for millions of Soviet citizens. Each facility was designed not only for production efficiency, but also as a stage for demonstrating ideological commitment. Workers operated machinery, assembled products, monitored quality, and participated in training sessions, often under strict supervision and with performance expectations tied to state goals. Labor productivity was emphasized as both a civic duty and a moral responsibility, with successful workers celebrated publicly through awards, certificates, and newspaper articles. Factory floors were often highly organized, with clear hierarchies, designated responsibilities, and rigorous adherence to schedules, reflecting the state's vision of disciplined, collective labor as the foundation of socialist achievement. The daily routines of factory workers were structured around shifts, which often extended long hours and included night work, depending on industrial demands. Citizens adjusted personal and family life to accommodate these schedules, coordinating childcare, household responsibilities, and communal interactions with work obligations. Meals, rest periods, and social interactions were often planned around shifts, creating a rhythm of life in which work dominated public and private schedules. Workers developed strategies for efficiency, coping with fatigue and maintaining morale, drawing on solidarity with colleagues, participation in state-sponsored recreational activities, and small rituals that punctuated their routines. Safety and regulation were central to industrial work, though standards varied widely depending on the era, industry, and location. Citizens often faced challenging and dangerous conditions, particularly in heavy industry, mining, or construction. Protective equipment, training, and strict adherence to operational procedures were emphasized. But accidents were not uncommon, and resilience became a necessary attribute for survival. Propaganda and ideological messaging reinforced the importance of vigilance, collective responsibility, and dedication, framing the challenges of factory life as part of the larger effort to build socialism and contribute to national progress. Daily work life extended beyond production lines to include educational programs, labor brigades, and community initiatives organized through factories and local administration. Workers participated in meetings, ideological instruction sessions, and social activities designed to reinforce collective identity, morale, and adherence to state objectives. Literacy programs, technical training, and skill development were integral to workplace life, reflecting the Soviet emphasis on continuous improvement and citizen engagement. These programs also provided opportunities for social mobility, allowing dedicated individuals to advance professionally, acquire specialized knowledge, and gain recognition within the factory and broader community. Women played a central role in the workforce, balancing industrial labor with family responsibilities. Maternity support, childcare facilities, and communal resources were provided to facilitate women's participation, although societal expectations often required managing both professional and domestic duties. Gender dynamics within factories reflected broader ideological goals, emphasizing equality while also revealing the complexities of daily life. As women navigated multiple responsibilities, societal pressures, and the physical demands of industrial labor, workplace culture was deeply intertwined with ideological reinforcement. Factories often displayed propaganda posters, slogans, and portraits of leaders, reminding citizens of their collective mission and moral obligations. Celebrations of production achievements, such as exceeding quotas or completing 5-year plan targets, involved public recognition, ceremonies, and sometimes small festivities, creating a sense of accomplishment and community. Even leisure activities, sports competitions, and cultural events were organized through factories or local collectives, further linking work life to the broader objectives of state-directed society. The rhythms of daily life in the Soviet Union were thus heavily influenced by transportation systems, factory schedules, and workplace culture. Citizens adapted their personal routines, family interactions, and social behaviors to align with collective obligations, demonstrating resilience, discipline, and creativity in managing limited resources, long work hours, and structured environments. Despite challenges, factory work provided opportunities for skill development, social interaction, and participation in collective achievements, creating a complex interplay between personal experience and state objectives. In summary, transportation networks, factories, and daily work life formed the backbone of industrial society in the Soviet Union. Railways, trams, and buses facilitated mobility, enabling citizens to meet the demands of labor and participate in urban and industrial life. Factories structured daily routines, shaped social interactions, and reinforced ideological commitments through work, education, and collective activities. Citizens navigated these systems with discipline, creativity, and resilience, balancing personal needs with collective responsibilities, while contributing to the nation's ambitious industrialization goals. Through this integration of mobility, labor, and ideology, Soviet society created a rhythm of daily life that reflected both the challenges and achievements of building socialism in a rapidly modernizing world. Life in Soviet cities was a careful balancing act between the achievements of industrialization and the constraints imposed by scarcity, state control, and collective living. Urban development created dense neighborhoods of apartment blocks, micro-districts, and communal housing designed to accommodate workers and their families. These spaces provided access to essential amenities such as schools, clinics, childcare facilities, and cultural centers. But they were also shaped by the limitations of centralized planning and resource allocation. Citizens quickly adapted to urban life, learning to navigate the rhythms of communal living, limited access to goods, and regulated public services while maintaining daily routines that blended work, leisure, and family responsibilities. Shops, markets, and food distribution points formed a critical part of daily life in Soviet cities. Grocery stores, bakeries, and small markets offered staples such as bread, potatoes, vegetables, dairy, and meat, though supplies were often limited and subject to rationing or queues. Citizens became adept at planning, waiting, and sometimes improvising with substitute ingredients, demonstrating resilience and resourcefulness in the face of scarcity. Specialized stores, such as those selling clothing, household goods, or luxury items, were even more limited, often requiring connections, patience, or travel to access. Shopping became not only a practical activity, but also a social one, as neighbors exchanged information, tips, and assistance while waiting in line or navigating the sometimes chaotic distribution systems. Urban amenities extended beyond basic necessities to include cultural and recreational facilities that reinforced both communal cohesion and ideological education. Libraries, theaters, cinemas, and sports halls were integral to neighborhood planning, providing citizens with opportunities for intellectual engagement, entertainment, and physical activity. Public parks, squares, and playgrounds offered spaces for leisure, family gatherings, and youth activities, contributing to a sense of community within the structured urban environment. Schools and daycare centers were strategically integrated into residential districts, ensuring that children received education, care, and socialization while parents participated in the labor force. Citizens quickly learned to incorporate these resources into their daily routines, balancing work obligations, domestic responsibilities, and participation in social and cultural activities. Transportation within cities played a key role in daily life, shaping how citizens accessed shops, workplaces, and recreational facilities. Trams, buses, and metro systems provided relatively efficient means of travel, though overcrowding, delays, and maintenance issues were common challenges. Walking was also a primary mode of movement, especially within micro-districts where schools, clinics, and stores were within accessible distances. Citizens became adept coordinating family schedules and anticipating disruptions, turning urban mobility into a skill and a necessary aspect of daily planning. Daily life in cities was also defined by work schedules, communal obligations, and neighborhood dynamics. Apartment blocks often required residents to cooperate on shared responsibilities, such as maintaining hallways, coordinating waste disposal, and managing communal utilities. Neighborhood committees organized local events, monitored compliance with rules, and facilitated communication with city authorities, creating a microcosm of governance and social interaction. Children played in courtyards and playgrounds, while adults balanced household chores, employment, and participation in neighborhood activities. creating a rhythm of urban life that combines structure, adaptation, and community engagement. Food preparation and domestic routines were central to urban life. Citizens often relied on local shops, markets, and supply points to acquire ingredients, then used ingenuity to prepare meals that stretched limited resources. Kitchens in apartments, especially in communal living situations, were shared spaces where families interacted, exchanged recipes, and managed the practical challenges of communal cooking. Meal times were important social occasions, reinforcing family bonds, cultural traditions, and routines amidst the constraints of urban life. Seasonal cooking, preservation of vegetables and fruits, and preparation of traditional dishes maintained cultural continuity and provided comfort in daily routines. Cultural life in urban settings offered citizens moments of intellectual stimulation and recreation. Libraries provided access to literature, newspapers, and magazines, often with a mix of state-approved and classic works. Theaters, cinemas, and concert halls allowed citizens to attend performances that ranged from socialist-themed productions to classical music and dramatic works. Participation in cultural life was often intertwined with ideological education, as citizens were encouraged to attend performances, exhibitions, and lectures that reinforced socialist ideals. Community clubs, hobby groups, and sports teams allowed individuals to develop skills, socialize, and engage in constructive leisure, providing a sense of fulfillment beyond work and domestic life. Despite the challenges of scarcity, rationing, and crowded living conditions, citizens developed strategies to navigate urban life effectively. Networks of family, friends, and neighbors provided support in acquiring goods, sharing childcare responsibilities, and organizing communal activities. Adaptation, patience, and resilience were essential qualities, as urban dwellers balanced personal aspirations, family life, and social expectations within a highly regulated environment. Citizens learned to find moments of creativity, joy, and cultural engagement, demonstrating the human capacity to maintain a sense of normalcy, satisfaction, and community, even under constraints. In essence, urban amenities, shops, and daily life in Soviet cities reflected both the achievements and limitations of planned industrial society. Residents adapted to shared housing, regulated resources, and centralized services while engaging in work, family life, cultural activities, and community participation. Cities became environments in which citizens balanced structure with creativity, scarcity with resourcefulness, and individual needs with collective responsibilities. Through careful planning, social cooperation, and personal resilience, urban residents carved out a rhythm of life that allowed them to meet material needs, maintain cultural identity, and participate in communal and ideological life, demonstrating adaptability and perseverance in the evolving urban landscape of the Soviet Union. Education in the Soviet Union was a central pillar of the state's social and ideological agenda, designed not only to impart knowledge and skills, but also to instill socialist values, collective responsibility, and loyalty to the state. From early childhood through higher education, the system was meticulously structured, emphasizing literacy, numeracy, technical proficiency, and ideological instruction. Schools were accessible to citizens across urban and rural areas, reflecting the state's commitment to universal education as a means of promoting both social equity and economic development. Classrooms were organized, disciplined, and methodically planned, with students following detailed curricula that combined academic subjects with practical skills and moral instruction. Teachers were expected to serve not only as educators but also as ideological guides, shaping students' understanding of history, science, literature, and social responsibility in accordance with socialist principles. Kindergartens and preschools played a foundational role in early education, preparing children for school and social integration. These institutions emphasized cooperative play, basic literacy, numeracy, and artistic expression, while also introducing children to collective values and routines. Activities included singing, drawing, storytelling, and simple scientific experiments designed to stimulate curiosity, creativity, and cognitive development. Even at this early stage, children were introduced to the idea of contributing to society and understanding their roles within a collective framework, blending educational objectives with subtle ideological messaging. Primary and secondary schools built on this foundation, providing structured instruction across a range of subjects, including mathematics, Russian language and literature, history, science, geography, and physical education. Each subject was infused with socialist interpretation, ensuring that knowledge was framed in ways that reinforced collective ideals and historical narratives favorable to the state. History lessons emphasized the achievements of the Russian Empire, revolutionary heroes, and the triumphs of socialism, while science and technology education highlighted industrial progress, innovation, and the contributions of Soviet scientists and engineers. Students were encouraged to think critically within approved frameworks, developing analytical skills while absorbing the moral and ideological lessons embedded in curricula. Youth programs were tightly integrated with the educational system, providing structured activities, socialization opportunities, and ideological reinforcement. Organizations such as the Young Pioneers and later the Komsomol engaged children and adolescents in a wide range of activities, including sports, cultural performances, community service, and ideological education. Membership was widespread and often seen as a rite of passage, marking a child's transition into responsible citizenship and aligning personal development with state objectives. Uniforms, badges, rituals, and pledges were central to these programs, creating a sense of belonging, pride, and identity, while also reinforcing discipline and collective loyalty. Schools emphasized both academic and practical skills. Students participated in hands-on workshops, laboratory experiments, agricultural projects, and technical training sessions, preparing them for future careers in industry, science, or administration. Vocational education was closely linked to labor needs, ensuring that graduates could contribute effectively to the economy while also internalizing the value of work as a civic and moral duty. Female students were encouraged to pursue both intellectual and practical skills, participating in workshops, domestic science classes, and technical programs designed to prepare them for participation in the workforce, family life, and community responsibilities. Extracurricular activities provided opportunities for personal development, creative expression, and social engagement. Music, art, theater, and sports were integrated into school life, with competitions, recitals, and performances reinforcing achievement, teamwork, and collective pride. Science clubs, reading circles, and literary events fostered curiosity, critical thinking, and cultural awareness, while also providing a structured framework for supervised engagement beyond the classroom. These activities contributed to the development of well-rounded citizens, capable of both intellectual contribution and social participation, while maintaining alignment with ideological expectations. Discipline and routine were central to education, shaping daily life for students and their families. School schedules were strict, with classes beginning early in the morning and structured breaks for meals and recreation. Homework, attendance, and participation in youth programs were closely monitored, with teachers, parents, and local authorities collaborating to ensure compliance and academic progress. Citizens adapted family routines around school schedules, coordinating childcare, household responsibilities, and community involvement to support children's education. School uniforms, daily rituals, and public ceremonies created a sense of order, identity, and collective purpose, reinforcing the connection between individual behavior and societal expectations. The Soviet educational system also emphasized ideological literacy, ensuring that citizens developed an understanding of political, social, and historical narratives as defined by the state. Textbooks, classroom instruction, and youth programs presented a cohesive worldview in which socialism was the ultimate expression of moral, social, and economic progress. Students learned about revolutionary heroes, exemplary workers, and scientific achievements, internalizing lessons of responsibility, discipline, and patriotism. Field trips, museum visits, and community projects reinforced classroom learning, providing practical and experiential engagement with state-approved knowledge and values. Education extended into higher schooling and specialized institutions, where students pursued advanced studies in science, engineering, medicine, literature, and the arts. Universities and technical institutes provided rigorous academic training, often accompanied by mandatory ideological instruction and participation in youth or labor programs. Graduates were expected to contribute professionally, socially, and ideologically, integrating their personal achievements with collective goals and national development. Scholarships, awards, and public recognition incentivized excellence, while reinforcing the connection between individual effort and state objectives. In essence, education, schools, and youth programs in the Soviet Union were deeply intertwined with the broader goals of socialization, labor preparation, and ideological formation. Daily life for students was structured around academic study, practical training, and participation in youth organizations, creating a rhythm that combined intellectual development, socialization, and moral instruction. Citizens navigated educational routines, extracurricular activities, and family responsibilities with discipline, creativity, and adaptability, ensuring that the system fulfilled its dual purpose of skill development and ideological reinforcement. Through these programs, the Soviet Union cultivated a generation of citizens who were educated, socially engaged, and committed to collective ideals, balancing personal growth with the responsibilities of participation in socialist society. Higher education in the Soviet Union represented both an opportunity for intellectual advancement and a critical instrument of state development, designed to produce skilled professionals who could contribute to industrial, scientific, and administrative goals. Universities, technical institutes, and specialized schools provided rigorous academic training across disciplines, including engineering, medicine, natural sciences, literature, and the arts. Students were admitted through competitive processes, often based on academic achievement, ideological reliability, and participation in youth programs. Entry into higher education was highly prized, as it not only conferred personal prestige, but also provided access to career opportunities, social mobility, and participation in shaping the nation's future. Technical schools, vocational institutes, and specialized programs were particularly important for meeting the state's industrial and economic objectives. These institutions combined theoretical instruction with practical training, equipping students with skills in areas such as machinery operation, construction, metallurgy, electronics, and chemical production. Workshops, laboratories, and apprenticeships allowed students to gain hands-on experience under the supervision of experienced instructors, ensuring that graduates could immediately contribute to factories, construction projects, or research institutions. The curriculum emphasized precision, efficiency, and problem-solving, reflecting the state's goal of producing highly competent professionals, capable of advancing industrial productivity and technological innovation. Higher education also served as a mechanism for ideological education and socialization. Students were expected to participate in political discussions, attend lectures on Marxist-Leninist theory, and engage in collective activities that reinforced socialist values. University life was closely regulated, with committees monitoring student behavior, academic progress, and participation in social programs. Recognition, awards, and opportunities for leadership within student organizations were linked not only to academic performance, but also to ideological conformity, fostering a sense of responsibility, discipline, and loyalty to the state. Youth organizations such as the Komsomol played a central role, integrating students into broader networks of social and political engagement, and providing channels for career advancement and public recognition. Daily life for students in higher education was structured and demanding. Academic schedules were rigorous, with lectures, laboratory sessions, study groups, and exams occupying the majority of weekdays. Students living in dormitories or shared apartments coordinated domestic responsibilities, meals, and study routines with fellow residents, creating a community-oriented environment that emphasized mutual support, collaboration, and collective discipline. Recreational activities, including sports, cultural clubs, and volunteer work, were integrated into student life, balancing academic obligations with personal development and social engagement. Citizens learned to manage time efficiently, cultivate self-discipline, and develop collaborative skills, all of which prepared them for professional roles and responsibilities within the socialist state. Vocational and technical training also included exposure to real-world work environments, with students completing internships, cooperative placements, and practical projects in factories, laboratories, and research institutions. These experiences reinforced theoretical learning, provided insight into workplace expectations, and strengthened the connection between education and career preparation. Students were encouraged to approach tasks with both technical competence and ideological awareness, understanding their roles not only as skilled workers but also as contributors to the broader goals of industrial and social development. Career preparation extended beyond technical proficiency to include the cultivation of leadership, initiative, and civic responsibility. Graduates were expected to assume roles in administration, research, industry, and cultural institutions, contributing to national development while embodying the values of collective effort, discipline, and social commitment. Merit, demonstrated skill, and participation in youth and ideological programs influenced career trajectories, creating pathways for individuals to advance professionally while serving the state's objectives. Students were also encouraged to participate in public recognition programs, competitions, and scientific exhibitions, showcasing their achievements and reinforcing the link between personal accomplishment and collective pride. The integration of higher education with state planning created both opportunities and challenges. While universities and technical schools provided access to knowledge, training, and social advancement, they also required students to navigate ideological expectations, resource limitations, and competitive environments. Citizens adapted by developing study strategies, forming collaborative networks, and participating actively in both academic and social programs. The balance of intellectual growth, professional preparation, and ideological alignment was central to daily life, shaping students' experiences and fostering resilience, creativity, and commitment. Gender participation in higher education was emphasized, with women encouraged to pursue fields in science, engineering, medicine, and administration alongside men. Educational programs were designed to equip female students with both professional and practical skills, preparing them for dual roles in the workforce and family life. This approach reflected the Soviet commitment to gender equality in principle, while also navigating the realities of societal expectations and labor demands. Women in higher education participated fully in academic, vocational, and social programs, contributing to research, technical projects, and collective initiatives while building expertise and professional identity in addition to domestic goals. Higher education in the Soviet Union was tied to scientific innovation, technological advancement, and international prestige. Universities and institutes served as centers for research in physics, chemistry, engineering, medicine, and space exploration, producing scientists and engineers whose work contributed to the nation's industrial, military, and technological competitiveness. Students participated in laboratories, experiments, and research projects that had tangible implications for industrial output, scientific knowledge, and national reputation. This integration of education with innovation highlighted the practical and ideological significance of higher learning, demonstrating how individual academic achievement contributed directly to collective progress. In essence, higher education, technical schools, and career preparation in the Soviet Union were designed to produce skilled, disciplined, and ideologically aligned citizens capable of contributing to national development. Academic rigor, practical training, ideological instruction, and social engagement were tightly integrated into student life, shaping daily routines, personal development, and professional pathways. Citizens navigated these systems with diligence, adaptability, and collaboration, balancing intellectual growth, career preparation, and participation in youth and ideological programs. Through this integration, the Soviet Union cultivated generations of professionals who were technically proficient, socially responsible, and committed to the collective ideals of socialist society, blending personal achievement with national objectives in a highly structured educational framework. Adult education in the Soviet Union was considered a vital component of both economic development and ideological reinforcement, reflecting the state's commitment to cultivating a skilled, informed, and socially responsible populace. Programs targeted citizens of all ages, aiming to improve literacy, technical proficiency, vocational competence, and ideological understanding. Lifelong learning was promoted through institutions such as evening schools, technical courses, professional institutes, and workers' clubs, providing opportunities for career advancement, skill acquisition, and personal enrichment. Adult education was closely linked to the broader objectives of industrial growth, social mobility, and the cultivation of a citizenry aligned with socialist principles, ensuring that learning extended beyond childhood and formal schooling into every stage of life. Evening schools and correspondence courses offered practical solutions for continuing education while balancing work, family responsibilities, and other obligations. Evening schools provided structured classes in subjects ranging from literacy and mathematics to technical skills, foreign languages, and professional training. Students attended lessons after completing their work shifts, demonstrating commitment to self-improvement and professional growth. Correspondence courses allowed individuals in remote regions, rural areas, or demanding jobs to pursue education at their own pace, submitting assignments by mail and receiving guidance from instructors. These methods extended educational opportunities to citizens who might otherwise have been excluded due to geography, employment, or family obligations. Reflecting the state's emphasis on accessibility and skill development, vocational training and professional development programs were central to adult education, especially in industries critical to the nation's economic objectives. Factories, collective farms, and state enterprises organized courses to improve efficiency, introduce new technologies, and update worker competencies. Training programs ranged from short workshops to multi-year certifications, covering areas such as mechanical repair, electrical engineering, metallurgy, agriculture, and administrative skills. Participants acquired both practical knowledge and an understanding of best practices, enhancing their value to the workforce while reinforcing the ideology of collective responsibility and continuous improvement. Supervisors and instructors emphasized both technical skill and adherence to workplace standards, linking personal development to productivity, efficiency, and loyalty to the state. Adult education was not limited to technical instruction. Ideological training and cultural literacy were also integral components. Workers and professionals were encouraged to study Marxist-Leninist theory, Soviet history, literature, and political economy as part of lifelong learning programs. Community centers, workers' clubs, and local cultural institutions hosted lectures, discussion groups, and reading circles, creating spaces where citizens could engage intellectually while strengthening their ideological alignment. These programs fostered critical thinking within prescribed frameworks, promoted civic participation, and reinforced collective values, ensuring that adult education served both practical and political purposes. The state actively encouraged participation in professional development programs through incentives, recognition, and integration with career advancement opportunities. Workers who completed additional training, demonstrated mastery of skills, or excelled in professional courses often received promotions, awards, or public acknowledgement. These incentives reinforced the notion that continuous learning and skill enhancement were not only personal responsibilities, but also contributions to societal progress and national achievement. Citizens understood that lifelong learning could improve economic security, social standing, and community influence, motivating active engagement in education at all stages of life, even in rural areas. Adult education played a crucial role in bridging gaps in literacy, technical knowledge, and professional skills. Collective farms, for example, organized evening classes, workshops, and study groups to teach modern agricultural techniques, machinery operation, and best practices in crop production and animal husbandry. These programs allowed rural citizens to increase productivity, adopt new methods, and participate more fully in the state-directed agricultural economy. Adult education also included cultural and ideological components, with lessons in local history, literature, and political theory reinforcing a sense of identity, shared purpose, and alignment with national objectives. Lifelong learning extended into informal education as well, with citizens pursuing knowledge and skills through reading, self-study, and participation in local, cultural, or professional organizations. Libraries, community centers, and workers' clubs provided access to books, magazines, technical manuals, and educational programs, enabling individuals to continue learning independently. Citizens were encouraged to engage in personal enrichment alongside formal training, fostering curiosity, creativity, and intellectual engagement. This culture of lifelong learning contributed to both personal fulfillment and professional competence, reflecting the Soviet ideal of a well-rounded, informed, and capable citizenry. Professional development was closely linked to the state's broader economic and industrial goals. As technology advanced and production methods evolved, workers needed to adapt to new machinery, processes, and organizational systems. Continuous education ensured that the workforce remained competent, efficient, and capable of meeting ambitious production targets. Training programs also emphasized quality, precision, and adherence to safety standards, preparing citizens to navigate the complexities of industrial, agricultural, and administrative work. These programs often combined classroom instruction, hands-on practice, and supervised experience, creating a holistic approach to skill development and professional readiness. Adult education also reinforced social cohesion and collective identity. Study groups, workshops, and community learning sessions fostered interaction among citizens, creating networks of mutual support, mentorship, and shared knowledge. Participants exchanged practical advice, problem-solving techniques, and professional insights, while also developing relationships that strengthened community bonds. These interactions contributed to social stability, cooperative behavior, and a sense of belonging, integrating individual learning with communal engagement and shared responsibility. In essence, adult education, lifelong learning, and professional development in the Soviet Union were designed to create a skilled, adaptable, and ideologically aligned citizenry capable of contributing to national development. Programs were accessible, structured, and diverse, covering technical skills, vocational training, ideological instruction, and personal enrichment. Citizens navigated these opportunities alongside work and family responsibilities, demonstrating resilience, commitment, and creativity in balancing multiple aspects of daily life. Through these initiatives, the state cultivated a population that could adapt to changing economic and technological demands, maintain ideological awareness, and participate actively in societal progress, ensuring that education extended throughout life as both a personal and collective responsibility.